All right, kids. So I just wanted to review our introduction to communication. Remember, communication means signals are being sent out that are going to elicit a response, okay? And this is important in everything practically that's going on in living things. And those signals can be either a substance or an action. An action, like for an example, light can be something that would elicit a response in plants. A substance, though, particularly when we call them ligands, okay, are proteins that are going to act as signals that are going to elicit the response. So here we have our two types of traveling signals, so to speak. We have signals that will go locally, where there will be no distance or a short distance they're going, or signals that are going a long distance. So let's start with the local ones. If they're going no distance, in other words, one cell is right next to another, okay? If those cells are connected, like in animal cells, we have gap junctions, and in plants, we have plasmodesmata. That's like if you're looking at one cell and another cell, and they have this tiny little gap between them. It's a gap junction if these are animal cells, but if there's a cell wall, obviously it's plant cell. So cytoplasm is going to exchange information between these two cells via that little tunnel, so to speak. So I like to call these like the tunnels between one cell and another. And so they can exchange information that way. This is definitely something that's important in the transpiration stream as it goes up in a plant, and as well as a lot of communication in even colonial organisms that form colonies like Spirogyra. They have a lot of these little tunnels between them. Gap junctions in your animals, plasmodesmata in plants. Now, sometimes say they don't have that gap junction between them, they don't have that connection. They still can make direct contact. In other words, touch their proteins to another one's cell membrane. So touching one cell membrane to another, I like to draw it like if this is one cell and this is another cell. They just simply touch right there. There's no connection between, they just simply touch and go. All right. That's direct contact. And usually it's protein to protein. So the protein in the cell membrane of the one cell to the protein in the cell membrane of another. Okay, and that's when we have no distance between the cells. They're right smack up against each other. Now, when there's a short distance, there's a couple of different possibilities it could be. Autocrine is, say, this is the cell, okay, and he releases some sort of substance, but that substance comes back and affects him. That's an autocrine type of signaling. Okay, auto, remember, meaning self. But paracrine would be there's a short distance, so the cells aren't right next to each other. Here's cell one and cell two, right? And if cell one releases a substance out, and cell two then picks up on that substance, okay, then that's paracrine signaling. Now, synaptic signaling is like paracrine because it's going from one cell to the next, but we call that space in between a synapse. And we'll see with nerves when we get to the end of a nerve ending, right? We'll talk about how neurotransmitters are in these tiny little vacuoles at the end, and when they bust open, the neurotransmitters are submitted across this synapse to another cell, okay, in the end of another cell, and they're picked up by another cell. It's just the difference between paracrine and synaptic is not really any more different than we call this now a synapse. And we will see that more in nerve cells and muscle cells, okay? And so we have our no distance, we have our short distance, and then our long distance. If we're sending signals long distance, most likely that's going to be a hormone or a pheromone. You might think, oh, that's just in animals. No, plants give off a lot of hormones too. Hormones are usually going to stay within that organism's body. So within the organism. So in other words, the hormones that my body produces is not going to affect the another person's body. Thank goodness, right? Okay, within the organism, that's hormones. Okay, and they're usually going to travel in the blood or lymph systems. Blood or lymph. Now, pheromones are not within the organism. They're to another organism. And that organism is usually species specific. Okay. And I like to think about ants, how they'll like travel, they'll follow the pathway of the lead ant. That's pheromones. Again, they're chemical substances that are released that are picked up by another organism, but of usually the same species. I can't think of anything that's not the same species. And then you react according to that. But those are things that are going long distance. Again, if it's hormones, they're usually traveling long distances, like substances from our pituitary can go all the way down and affect our big toe even. Okay. And pheromones are affecting another organism. So they're obviously secreted out there, but hormones are staying within the body. Okay. And so that's how signals can be transmitted. And then finally, like in our introduction, we just look at the stages of a signal transduction pathway, because this is all about signal transduction pathways. In other words, how is information converted from a messenger to a response, to the much wanted response. And there are 3 steps to that. Well, we already talked about the signals, and you could kind of call that another step, but that's just one part of it. The steps are reception. I like to think of them as the catchers. The catchers. Okay. How is that signal going to be received by the other organism or by another cell? Transduction, I like to call this the domino effect. The domino effect. Just like if you hit one domino, they start to cascade. Cascade is a common word that scientists will use. I also like to say whisper down the lane too. Whisper down the lane is like a message is sent on down the line. And we're going to see how that happens in cells. And then finally, the response. The response is exactly what it says. It's the desired effect, And that can come in 2 ways. And we're going to just put this out there now. It can be either a cytoplasmic response. Okay, and most of the time that's going to be like a cell secreting something out of it. Or it can be a nuclear response. And I know what you're going to say after I say this. Think dogma. Okay, and hopefully you remember dogma means DNA is going to make RNA, which is going to make a protein. Okay, that's whenever we see a nuclear response, that's what's going to happen. So the end result may trigger still yet another kind of pathway, but we call that the central dogma biology. It's going to trigger DNA to make messenger RNA that will in turn make protein and accomplish that task. Okay, and that's our introduction, and that's it for this.